Hi guys, and welcome back to another prediction video on the channel where we are going to predict the Champions League final between Inter Milan and PSG. It's all been leading to this. This is kind of the final thing to be decided, if you like, in the major European football calendar. And then we get on to our mini international break before pre-season begins and the transfers start running wild. And obviously we've got the Club World Cup this time around as well. But before we get into the breakdown of both teams' seasons and run to the final, thank you very, very much for all the new viewers and subscribers on the channel. It's magnificent to know that there's a lot of you kicking around, as well as the fact that we passed 13,000 subscribers very recently as well. So thank you very, very much for that. But without further ado, let's get into the breakdown of each of your two seasons and road to the Champions League final. So starting off with Inter Milan, we're only going to do the league seasons for both instead of the domestic cup seasons, just the same as we've done for the Conference League prediction and the Europa League prediction. By the way, I didn't do a reaction to the Conference League final because I didn't get a chance to watch the game fully, so didn't feel as though I could have done a proper breakdown for that, but congratulations goes to Chelsea, of course, even though I don't believe that Chelsea or Betis, for that matter, should be in the Conference League, and it should be reserved for teams outside the top 5 leagues. But Inter Milan, they, of course, missed out on the league title by 1 point to Napoli, thanks to a Scott McTominay bicycle kick that got them off and running for it, and Napoli win their 4th league title in their history, which surprised me. I thought they would have had a lot more than that, so not great on that standpoint for Inter. They'll be looking to rectify that in the Champions League final. PSG, however, to nobody's surprise, run away as Ligue 1 winners really, really comfortably. As you can see, on 84 points, they finished 19 points clear of their closest rivals in Marseille. And for the longest time, actually, they were unbeaten in the league season as well. They have, this season, it seems, without Mbappe, kicked on as a team instead of having that one superstar in the lineup that was expected to potentially carry them to glory, and they very well might win the Champions League for the first time in their history as well because of it. On to the roads to the final for both. I thought it best to start with PSG because they did not finish in the top 8 in the original standings. They finished in the top 24, which meant that they had to have a playoff round to get there. They had their French league counterparts in Brest, who had a really impressive campaign overall. However, it was brought to a grinding halt here with a 10-0 aggregate scoreline from PSG, winning 3-0 away from home and then 7-0 at home to resoundingly put an end to what at that point was a really strong campaign from Brest. And PSG did indeed move on to the round of 16 after that, where their prize was to face the team that actually finished first in the league phase in Liverpool. And despite losing 1-0 at home, if you remember watching the game, Alisson had the game of his life in that game. I don't know how Liverpool managed to come away with the win in that game, but PSG rectified things when they went to Anfield, which overall was a bit of a closer game than the one at PSG, where PSG did win 1-0 and it took it to penalties, and then quite comfortably in the penalty shootout in the end actually went through. Deservedly through over the course of the tie, though. They then went on to face Aston Villa, who they comfortably beat in France, and then they were ahead in the game quite comfortably against Aston Villa as well, and then it was a kind of wild game if you remember watching it. Aston Villa just got sparked into life by a really good strike by John McGinn, and then they almost managed to turn it around, but PSG go through 5-4 on aggregate in this game, and you would say that over the course of the two legs it was the deserved outcome, but Aston Villa did give them a bit of a fright in the second leg. And the third English opposition that they managed to face in the round of 16 stage, and to be honest, over the course of the two legs, Donnarumma was excellent over the course of the two legs. However, PSG, if they'd taken their chances, probably could have won over the course of the two legs really, really comfortably in the end, although in the second leg there was that Bukayo Saka awful miss that could have potentially made it 2-2 on the night, but I just don't think that Arsenal would have kicked on to do enough to get through in the end. And again, PSG see off English opposition for the third time to make it to the Champions League final. On to Inter Milan. If I remember rightly, they actually finished second in the league phase, so they didn't have to play in the playoffs. They then faced Feyenoord, 2-0 win away from home, relatively comfortable, and then 2-1 win at home to win 4-1 on aggregate, so nothing really to write home about here. This one, however, interesting game for a number of reasons. Bayern Munich had, in that point, they had soundly dispatched the team that had beat them for the Bundesliga title previous season in Bayer Leverkusen after getting through the tie against Celtic. Of course, this channel, mainly Scottish football dedicated, Bayern Munich did run away relatively comfortable winners at Celtic Park, although Celtic did manage to claw a goal back there, and then Celtic gave them a bit of a scare by going 1-0 up in Germany, and were playing for extra time by that point, and an Alphonso Davies pretty much last kick of the ball strike sent Bayern Munich through after a 1-1 draw with Celtic at home, and then they went and won really comfortably against Leverkusen. Bayern Munich, of course, despite the fact that they were maybe having some iffy results here and there, the fact that they had to play the playoff round against Celtic, for example, and not finish in the top 8, but the fact that the final is in Munich, is kind of the same with Bilbao. There was like maybe that hoodoo that would get them there. I'm pretty sure they took the lead in both legs, Bayern Munich as well, but Inter Milan had enough to see them off in the end, winning 4-3 on aggregate. And then we had the really, really entertaining semi-final on both occasions between Inter Milan and Barcelona. Some people called it the best semi-final that there's ever been in the Champions League. Two teams going at it. Inter, on both occasions, I'm pretty sure took a 2-goal lead, and then Barcelona came back into it as well. It was really entertaining football to watch. Unfortunately, in the extra time period, Inter scored relatively early on, and then Barcelona just couldn't get back into the game from there. But Inter managed to go through 7-6 winners on aggregate from a really entertaining semi-final. So on to the game itself tonight. Are PSG going to pick up their first ever Champions League title, or are Inter Milan going to pick up their first Champions League title since Jose Mourinho won it back with them? Obviously, both of these teams have been in Champions League finals in relatively recent seasons. PSG, during the COVID season, lost out to Bayern Munich in the final narrowly, and Inter Milan, of course, more recently than that, losing out to Manchester City on their first Champions League win. In fact, Inter Milan seem to have a bit of a history of losing to teams in their first Champions League wins. Man City, of course, recently. The famous Lisbon Lions victory for Celtic in 1967 was obviously Celtic's first triumph there. Could the trend continue and have PSG be first-time winners? I think it will, because I think as much as Inter Milan were able to beat Barcelona, I think PSG's defence is a little bit better than Barcelona's, and they're just as lethal on the attack as Barcelona. The counters that PSG have employed against the likes of Liverpool, Aston Villa and Arsenal in the league up to the final have been devastating at times, and I think that as much as Inter Milan will probably score some goals, I think PSG will outscore Inter Milan, and I'm going to go for a 3-2 PSG win. Hopefully it's an entertaining final anyway. Of course, the Europa League final wasn't that great in terms of entertainment value when Spurs won. Chelsea winning the Conference League, yeah, it was a 4-1 win. I can't comment on whether or not it was an entertaining final, though, because, of course, I didn't watch the whole thing. So fingers crossed we have an entertaining final here at the very least for it as well. So we'll see how it ends up going, but I'm going to predict a 3-2 PSG win. If you disagree, let me know in the comments below. I am also going to be uploading, finally, for the first time in a wee while, an episode of the SPFL RTG for FC25. If that's something that interests you, feel free to check that content out on the channel as well as other content. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll catch you in the next one.